Xanderro Gaming coming at you with another video, and today's video I'm going to be doing a Digimon tier list video. Yes, I'm going to be making a tier list and trying to include as many decks that I can think of in the Digimon trading card game. I really want to highlight some of the newer ones that have come out in the last couple of sets, so I'm going to try to really pull from those sets all the different archetypes. Even if I don't think some of them are very relevant, I do want to cover them in this video. And then I really took a long time to try and prepare and think about every competitive deck that I could think of in the Digimon trading card game, but I'm sure there's going to be one I missed. Please let me know in the comments which one I missed out on and let me know that. But let's get into the tier list. Okay, we are in the tier list maker here, and you can see going down here, I have some of the categories going on. We have best deck in format, and best decks could be, so maybe more than one, but just kind of trying to say what I think the best decks in the format are. And then here we have tier 1, so these are definitely decks in the Digimon trading card game that can, get tops in tournaments. So maybe top 32 will go for, say, in Digimon tournaments that'll be coming up. 1.5 is what I would consider maybe a rogue tier, so really strong decks in the Digimon trading card game, but maybe just that a lot of pilots aren't on, or something that isn't seen a ton lately, but can maybe still sneak in a couple tops here and there. I think that this category will be what the majority of these decks will probably fall into, if I had to take a guess. And then coming down here to tier 2, really good, solid decks in the Digimon trading card game, but they just need some, kind of help. They need something to help push them above. Maybe some more support in upcoming sets, or maybe they've had a lot of support and they just still don't have what they need to be a really competitive deck, right? And then on the bottom here, I like to have the outside looking in tier. So just decks that you could have a ton of support, or maybe none at all, or just, they're not going to be topping. The tier 2 and then the outside looking in, really for sure that one is not going to ever see into a tournament placing. At least I don't think so. But you can see here I have 52 decks, I think, listed. One of these images includes, what I used to make this. I will be sure to link this in the description of the video, so that way you guys can go to this tier list I made. I put a lot of work into getting some of these images, so that way you can make your own tier list and maybe, share them to some of your communities, or, tag me in them and let me know how good I did compared to your own video or your own tier list. But going down, these are the images we have here. You can see we have a lot of decks on this to do. I really tried to get just about every deck that I can think of on here. I know I've missed some. Probably going to be a glaring one, but please let me know in the comments which ones I missed and flame me for it. But to start this one off, let's go with something I do think that is a best deck in format, or one of the best decks. And just scrolling through, we got some. We'll just touch on a hot topic here. I do think that Gallantmon is now one of the best decks in the format, with all the support it got with the new Gallantmon X, which is a huge, just super powerful boss monster that the deck has been waiting for. And then really some of the support that it's gotten in the lineups of the new Guilmon X and other, War Growlmon X's and stuff like that they got in the set. And combined with the Gallantmon X Anybody, I think just makes him absolutely just, so powerful of a card. And I think it does throw this deck into the, best deck in format. One of the best decks. So I think in Digimon, there's not at the moment a quintessential best deck. I think that they'll probably end up being, 5 decks in this category, which is a great way to kind of make up what the, top meta decks are. But Gallantmon, definitely one of the best decks in the format, in my opinion. I did have this organized earlier, but it kind of reset it on it. I was trying to go over some of the newer decks first in this one, but since we're on it, and it's one of my favorite decks from the newer set, this is the Nightmare Soldiers deck. I do think that this deck is really strong, and it can pop off, but it is very piece reliant, big time piece reliant. But if you've ever seen or played against this deck, you do know that it can pop off. It's a really cool, strong deck. I think it has a lot of support, even though it's really just in this one set alone, but it has gotten so much support in this set, it can do a lot. I think it This deck is really hard to pilot though, and that'll be the big thing. Like if someone puts a lot of time into this deck, knows their plays, knows how to get their, Candlemon when Digivolvings to push their state of the game. I've seen at our locals this deck be able to go in and OTK an opponent on one turn. From 5 security down to 0 life. Taking them out with all the different shenanigans this deck could do. I do not think it needs any more help, but I can see it maybe potentially topping as a road deck. I know this is probably a lot higher than some people have this deck, maybe, not giving it the respect that it deserves. But I do think this is a very powerful deck, really cool, awesome deck. Love to see this come into the Digimon trading card game. Nightmare Soldiers, a good rogue deck that you can take in the Digimon trading card game. Alright, going down, let's touch up on Machinedramon since he's here hanging out. Machinedramon always needs help. And I feel like that's just always the way it is. I think a very specific style of meta that pertains to, Machinedramon having a good foothold in the meta is the only times that we ever see Machinedramon coming out and doing decent in tournaments. I do not foresee this deck topping any tournaments anytime soon. I think it's just really too slow for what it does in the current state of the Digimon trading card game. And with that being said, I think I'll just put it on the outside looking in. I don't think it's just missing a couple pieces. I think that, the deck is just slow. I think it has everything it needs. It's just, it has to be certain metas and formats that Machinedramon comes up and can maybe, sneak a top in here. I do think that there are some interesting new cards that are coming out for Machinedramon that are cyborgs and machines that maybe Machinedramon can go to a more simplistic style of building up your stack, and maybe something can happen from there. But from the way that Machinedramon is now, I do think that it is on the outside looking in. Unfortunately, he is one of my favorite Digimon, so it hurts me to have to say this about him. Going through here, Dragon Links, since this is also one of my favorite decks, I do think that this deck can do some really cool things, but it does need some help because we're still waiting on that Hina to come out, right? And we do know that they are getting the new Hina. I think that once this, deck gets that, it'll be a great deck, but I'm trying to talk about what the state it is of the card game right now, and it still needs that help, right? Like, we don't have those cards yet, so this deck is still on the outside looking in. But if you've ever played against this deck and they're able to get down some of those level 6s of theirs that, put you in the floodgate situations where you can't do a lot of things, then this deck can really control your board. And as opposed to Machinedramon with how slow it is, I think that this deck, being able to digivolve into its lineups, being able to abuse, some of the tamer card, the searching cards, the training cards, min boost. I do think that this deck has a spot where it can maybe steal some wins here and there, but it does need some help, but still a really cool, strong deck. Since he's here, our favorite purple boy, I think that people just don't play Beelzemon anymore. I don't think that Beelzemon is a bad deck. I think that people maybe got tired of Beelzemon since it got played so much in the format when it did come out, and before the Entmon got hit to 1. But I do think that there is a lot of tools for Beelzemon to still see some good matchups in the meta. I just don't think people are on this deck. So hopefully, maybe me making this video, some people see that I have Beelzemon and I'm bringing him up. Like I said, I'm really reaching at the, in the barrel of the Digimon trading card game, trying to talk about some of these decks. I do think the Beelzemon is really strong. It did get the new support with the one Beelzemon that gives you, the D-Digivolve, the one that came out recently. I think that adds a lot for the deck, and I do think that the Scramble cards help this deck out a lot. If you're able to bring that Scramble out, bring out your Entmons to help further your plays. I think that it's just going to take someone really cooking with this deck to make it happen, but it's still really strong. I randomly pulled out my Beelzemon deck, didn't touch anything in it, and I did pretty good in the couple games that I did with it. I do think that it is a deck that, can be a rogue deck. I think it still has a lot of really strong plays. I think if you high roll with the deck, you can still compete with some of the best decks in the format. Really good deck. So for all the Beelzemon fans, where are y'all at? Take Beelzemon, throw some of the new cards into it, and get this deck into some topping in the tournaments, because it's still a very powerful deck and you have a lot of tools to work with. I love Beelzemon. He's so cool. So I will put him in the rogue tier. I'll try to make sure I clarify that, so that way if anyone's, listening and not able to watch the video. At the moment, we got, Nightmare Soldiers, Beelzemon in the rogue tier, the Dragon Links in the need help tier, and then Machinedramon on the outside looking in with Gallantmon into one of the best decks of the format. let's go through. The blue boy is looking me in the face, and Mirage is one of the best decks in the format. I don't think that this is really up for contention for anyone. This deck is really strong. However you want to see this, Mirage, Toolbox, Blue, Good Thing decks. I kind of just clumped them all in with the image for the Mirage Galgamon. It's just a really strong card. Definitely any kind of deck you're trying to build with that is really, really cool and really strong. And while I'm thinking about that, I guess Mirage and like Grace Nova, I did put Grace Nova here, but I was really saying this as its own deck, right? Grace Nova. I'm not really thinking about the Grace Nova package. I think Grace Nova as a deck on its own needs some help. If you just try to run just those cards, I think it has, you know, some tools that it can work with. But I don't want to touch on that one too much because we just don't see it played as this deck, right? We see people abusing the systems of the core of this deck. And if you want to take it that way and then want to put, you know, any kind of like thing that uses the Grace Nova package, that could be one of the best decks of format if you're just using like Mirage. But I'm specifically just trying to talk about blue good stuff here with Mirage. Best deck in format, one of the best deck in formats for sure. Oppresses your opponent. I do think that something needs to happen to Mirage because, you know, Digimon has not been shy with saying before in past, you know, ban lists that something's been too long in the meta, right? And I do think that Mirage has been here too long. It stops a lot of decks from wanting to do what they do, and it's not fun to play against. But one of the best decks in format, Blue, Mirage, good stuff. And then Grace Nova, just needing some help. If anything, outside looking in, I don't think there's... Maybe the need help tier is tiers that could maybe sneak in somewhere, not really. And the outside looking in is definitely not happening. And I think that if you're building just Grace Nova and trying to get into him, you would be on the outside looking in a big tournament. The deck does some really cool things, and I think that its core just gets abused more by better cards in the game. Its core is really cool, but when you run only its core itself, once you lose those big bodies, you kind of lose out of tempo on the game. Going down, who we want to talk about? One of the old goodies, a Metal Garurumon. Whether you want to build it blue or purple, I just put this the blue and purple one on here. Much in the, you know, like of Beelzemon, I think that people just don't play this deck anymore. You have Protoform still, you have really good, strong cards, you have a lot of support, you have a lot of ways to slow down people's game plan by stunning their board and not letting their stuff suspend. I do think that this is still a really, really good deck, but we have a good problem in Digimon where we have so many good decks that it makes it hard to, you know, peek up some of these other decks, these old decks, but I don't think that means these old decks, some of these older decks like Beelzemon and Metal Garurumon have lost their power. I think that a lot of people just aren't playing them, and I think that you could take Metal Garurumon and, you know, maybe sneak into a tournament somewhere, win your locals with it. It's still just as powerful as it was. Maybe a little slow since they've hit some of the pieces in it that you can't just, you know, abuse some of those older cards, but it is still a really strong deck, a nice 1.5 rogue tier deck for sure. Let's go over here to the Lord Nightmon X, purple good stuff. Really surprising to see this deck not do as good here as it did in Japan, right? I know that Japan really loves this deck, and we don't see it topping as much here in America. This could be because of how aggressive we like to play here, or how like strictly, you know, a lot of people are either like straight control or straight aggression, and there's not a lot of like wiggle room in the game in the middle. But from my opinion, I do think that Lord Nightmon X is still a really strong, powerful deck. I just think that a lot of people in, you know, America maybe being burnt out, seeing a lot of the JP format stuff, you know, abuse this deck too much. But I think that this is a deck is really strong. I do think that it can still top tournaments if you play it. I do think it takes a little skill and a good pilot to do it. I think that the deck is still really, really, really strong and has a lot of tools to play against some of these top decks with the ability, you know, to de-digivolve some of your opponent's Digimon, swing through over them, you know, make them have to block you. I think you have really good access to some good ace cards, and the deck is really consistent. I think that the showing here in America or in NA in general has just been lower on this deck, but I don't think that that takes away from the power of this deck. I think Lord Nightmon X is a really strong deck. And like I said, this is a video based off my opinion on these things, right? I think that this deck is really strong. I think that if you wanted to throw into the 1.5 row tier, that would maybe be a good spot too. But I think that a lot of people just aren't playing this deck right now, and that's why it's not getting as many tops as maybe we saw over there. Granted, Anubismon is hit. and it's down to 1, but you don't need it as much in this deck. I think it's a really strong, powerful deck, and I would like to see more people playing with this deck because I do think that it is a good contender that can top in some tournaments. Bloom Lord, everyone's favorite green deck that I just haven't seen people playing with it, but it's still a really strong deck. I think that it could be a really good rogue deck. Like I said, this rogue tier is going to be where most decks go, I feel like, because we're luckily in the Digimon trading card game, with how long the game has been out now, we have a lot of decks that have a lot of support, and I do think that we're just waiting for a couple of these really hardcore, Bloom Lordmon players to, get this deck, get back to it, add some of these new consistency cards that you have into the game into this deck, and give it another chance because you can still swarm your opponent's board. You can still do some crazy things to them. I think that with Medieval Gallantmon being out, it kind of hurts this deck a little bit too. People were wanting to play that green card and other stuff, but you can run it in this deck too, right? You can still throw Medieval in your Bloom Lord decks and have a good time with it, with being able to have all these suspended Digimon. I think that Bloom Lord is still a great rogue tier deck that you can take and maybe sneak into some tops. I think like with a lot of these older decks, you'll keep hearing me restate it. I think that people have just come off these decks with how many cool new decks that we've gotten into it, but I do not think that that takes away from the power of some of these older decks, and I do think that Bloom Lord is a good tier 1.5 rogue deck to play with. Only because she's here looking at me, Starmon Ace. I don't know how I feel about this deck because I know that there are the people I know who live by this deck, play it all the time, and when I see them play it, the deck just feels really powerful and strong, but other than that, I see it just not do anything in a lot of games, right? So I am going to put this deck on the need help tier, but realistically, the deck has already gotten so much support, so maybe on the outside looking in. I'll put it on the outside looking in. I think that what the deck does, being able to abuse some of its option cards, are really, really strong. And I think if you high roll with this deck, you can really compete. But I think it feels really clunky into a lot of the decks that can, have their combo pieces going up the line, going really, really strong and being able to pop off. Whereas Beelzemon, I feel like you're hard playing some stuff, trying to get into a line, trying to get your option cards and trashing them, all those shenanigans. But all the Beelstar Mommy players out there are going to come at me for this one, but I understand the power of this deck. I don't think it's very consistent. It doesn't need help because it's already gotten a lot of cards. But I can see someone, doing something with it. I'll put it in the need help tier, even though it's already gotten a lot of help. But it needs something else to, get it there. Whether that be people tinkering with the deck, because it does have a little bit more going for it than these two decks down here, for sure. But I'll put it in the need help tier, Beelstarmon. Alright, let's go Mother Control, Mother Reaper, however you want to say it. I do think that this stands more for Mother Control than it does a straight Mother Reaper deck. I do think that once more people make this more popular and people start to see it, pop up in deck lists, they will see this deck and really get hurt and surprised by it. If you haven't seen a Mother Control deck yet, with a lot of the medieval Gallantmons, a lot of the good black ace cards and black hybrids, I think that this is a tier 1 tournament topping, top 32 one will sneak in a lot of these bigger tournaments that we have coming up in the future. I think Mother Reaper has a great spot in the meta with a lot of the big decks in the format not really being able to touch her, right? Like Mirage can't touch her, Gallantmon can't touch her. A lot of these cards can't mess with Mother. And while Gallantmon can get over her DP sometimes, Mirage doesn't really have a lot of ways to get over a DP. It can run the guy that doesn't let you block, so with the Shoto Mother blocker being on there, you can get around it in that sense, and if you pop off fast enough, maybe the Mother can't do some things to you, but I think the way that these Mother lists can abuse some of these great aces in the card game, that, she's in a great spot. Trust me. Go against with one of these decks, and a lot of people may be surprised at me putting this deck up here this high, but I promise you, if you've played against it, you see how big of a problem this deck is. It's really strong. Maybe even above this. I think that I would put it almost into the best deck of the formats if it was a little faster, more consistent. I love this deck. I think it's really cool. We have someone at our locals who pilots it and won our locals. And I think that our locals is pretty competitive, and he really just destroyed everyone with it. It's such a strong, cool deck. Love Mother Control. Tier 1 tournament topper deck for sure. Let's go into Omnimon. I'm making this Omnimon, obviously the DNA Omnimon support. I think this is a really cool deck. It does see some tops. Even in Japan to this day, this deck sees some tops. I think it's a cool rogue tier that you can take. And, you know, if you see your lineup with this deck, you can pop off and just beat any deck in the game, really. Like, if you can go, you know, turn 3, able to go into your lineup, hard play your other body that you're missing, whether it be the Metal Garuru or the Greymon, get your DNA off, and have your option down. You know, a lot of decks stare at that and they're like, okay, I just lose now, right? Like, what do I do this? I try to clear this body. Now they go into Omnimon on me. Now I'm losing my whole board. It's a really powerful, strong deck, but it is very piece reliant, and I think that's why it doesn't do so well in long tournaments, because throughout a long tournament, a lot of these decks are getting knocked off along the way. But I do think that it can sneak in there, which is the rogue tier, sneaking in, taking a random top here. I think this deck is very strong, and it has a lot going for it. All right, going here, we have D Brigade. A little disappointed to see D Brigade. It's an older deck. It has a lot of support. Not getting the recognition that all these players that used to be on D Brigade don't do it anymore. But the Ricky Rush strategy of it and all the packages that you have to play in this deck to make it consistent is really, really strong. And I think it's an awesome deck. I think that it's a good rogue deck that if you want to take the time back into it, I don't think that it's lost any of its power. I think that you can, you know, maybe sneak into a tournament here. And now that this deck is cheaper too, right? Like, if you want to get into the card game and you want a good black deck, this is the deck for you. I think that it's a really cool, fun deck, and it's a good 1.5 rogue tier deck. And like I said, this rogue tier is going to be full of decks because I think there's a lot of really solid decks in the Digimon trading card game, especially a lot of older ones, and I think people just, you know, are sleeping on some of these older decks. But we'll try to get this through stuff a little bit quicker. This is Rapidmon, Bunny Armor deck. I think that this is still a really strong deck too. I will put it above, you know, the Lord Knight Monex. I don't think it's one of the best decks in format, but this deck still has everything going for it. Being able to abuse Heaven Judgment, being able to, you know, put your opponent into that place where they can't play their rookies once you're minusing 4,000 to their board every turn. Really strong deck, still does what it does. I think the fact that it has Armor Purge helps it out a lot against things like Gallantmon and some of these other decks that are going to try to swing into it. I do think that, you know, Mirage bouncing stuff back is a problem and why it's not one of the best decks in format, that it loses to that deck so hard. But one of my favorite decks, I love my Bunny decks, and I do think that it is a really strong tier 1, you know, getting a top in the tournaments. And I think we've seen that too, right? I thought I saw like one place in the last couple of tournaments here and there. Really strong, cool deck. To touch up one of the newer decks, people are sleeping on Dinomon. I think Dinomon is really strong. I know that we saw in one of the Asian tournaments recently, or Latin America, one of the tournaments recently, we had a Dinomon sneak into the top 32. I think it is a really cool, strong deck, and I do think that once more people see how strong Dinomon is, it'll get played more. But at the end of the day, I do still think that it is a rogue tier strategy deck. I'll put it kind of behind the Omnimon. I'll start organizing these a little bit as we get more cards in there, but really strong deck, being able to make your opponent, you know, swing into your Dinomons, and if they can't get over that body, they're going to be in a world of trouble, right? And this deck can really pop off, swing in, getting a lot of tricks. I do think that it is one of the stronger, newer decks to come out recently in that maybe people weren't thinking so much about. Touching on something, let's go Angels. I do think Angels... I don't like playing Angels, and I don't like playing against Angels because they are so strong. I think that this is one I'll wait until we get a little bit further in the list on to decide if I want to put it into one of the best decks in format or just a tournament topper. We'll come back on this one once I kind of see like what ends up being in this best decks of the format. I think that, you know, the people who love Angels love it. They stay on Angels. They play them all the time, and they're really, really strong. And I think that Angels can still pop off really, really hard. Dominimon is such a strong Digimon for this deck. And if you don't know how to get around Angels and you can't get rid of these aces, they can really swarm the board on you too and keep their board safe, which is really good. I think Angels is a really strong deck. This is Blue Green Imperial Dramon, and this is definitely still one of the best decks, hands down, in the game. For sure, super strong with everything. It has everything: swinging, unsuspending, trashing sources, stunning your board, everything you want, good protection option card, and great aces. This deck is insanely powerful, super strong. One of the best decks in the format, hands down. Not a lot to say on that one. But since we are on the topic of that one, I have seen more people playing with the purple-red, and we are getting support for this deck. And I think right now, at the moment, it's still a really good rogue deck that you can take. I think it's really strong. It still does a lot of things that it does. It is a little more piece reliant, so it's maybe not as consistent, not nearly as consistent as blue green, but it is getting a lot of support. I would recommend you try to build these decks now, get some of this support for it before all the prices start getting hyped up, because the new support is going to make it a, tournament topper for sure. But right now, I'll put it into the rogue tier above some of these other decks because I don't know how it gets around Dinomon. I think that Piedmon probably beats it. Probably a little more powerful at the moment than Beelzemon, so I'll kind of put it here. I'll start kind of organizing these a little bit. I might be overestimating the Piedmon, but he is one of my favorites for sure. Let's touch on Agumon. We got the new bond cards. People don't play these decks, and I don't foresee them doing really well as rogue, but the power is in these decks, but a lot of people don't play them. So at the moment, I'll put them down in tier 2, need help. A lot of people don't play them. I think they're a little bit slower because if you hard commit to the Agumon packages, maybe you're missing out. If you high roll in these decks, the high roll is crazy. Swinging with the Greymon, getting 2 checks, living, then, being able to put pressure on your opponent, and then later in the game, being able to just warp from your Agumon into these Agumons. It has a lot of draw power, more consistency, but we need to see more people playing these decks. I respect the power of these decks, but I do think that it takes a good pilot, and they need some help. Something to help them out in this deck. So not quite rogue tier, but still a really cool. These, the need help tiers are still strong, cool decks that you can play in Digimon, but maybe not able to sneak into a tournament topping. Since we touched on the Agumon, where is the Gabumon? We're going to put it in the Simmer of Light of Agumon as Gabumon. Both the decks do similar things with the aspect of building them. I think maybe Gabumon has a little bit more prevalence because you can just run, blue hybrid package stuff, but still needs a little help as a deck on its own. I do think that both of these aces, the Gabumon and Agumon, are really powerful cards that get added to other decks that really showcase what those cards can do really well. I know some lists, red hybrid decks running the Agumon and such like that too. Really cool. I love both these Digimon. I want to see these decks do better for sure. Let's touch on Lilithmon since she's here. I think that this is a really good rogue deck. I do think that it is stronger than a lot of these other decks because the way that this deck has outs against even the best decks in format and tier topper decks, the fact that you get through a lot of things by making your opponent delete their Digimon and you're giving their Digimon, your opponent deletes, this Digimon. That gets around a lot of things in the wording and the rulings on it. And it's a really cool deck, build 'em up deck. Really put pressure on your opponent. And I think that the option card, I'm forgetting what it's called, but that card is crazy. It's a really strong card once you have that going. I think Lilithmon is really strong. One of the fan favorite waifu cards of the Digimon trading card game, and it's super strong now that you have Lilithmon X. If you've never played against the Lilithmon X, be ready to, have your Digimon get destroyed and then pop off. Maybe make you trash cards, gain memory, all kinds of stuff. You can really build this deck all kinds of different ways, and I think it's really, really powerful. We just don't have a lot of people playing it, but if someone really good takes it, I think that it could be, sneaking in a top 32. So really good into the rogue tier here for sure. Nature Spirits, another thing that's gotten a lot of support recently. But I love this deck. I actually recently just built it, so I think it's a really cool deck. But it still needs some help, right? I think that it does some really cool things. I'll say that those are all worse than the 2 bonds. Put the Nature Spirits above the Beelstar. It just still needs some help. It does some really cool stuff. I'm going to cook with it. Maybe I can sneak in, a top in a tournament here or there with it. But it does really cool things. It's just too slow. At the end of the day, it's kind of like Beelstar where you're playing these things. I do think it's a little more consistent with Beelstar because you are digivolving up your lines. So I'll even put it above the Dragon Links. I'll put it at the top of this tier too. I like it a lot. I think it's strong. There are some cool things you can do with this deck, but I do think it needs some help. It's missing something, and I'm not quite sure what it is because this Nature Spirits card doesn't help the deck out a lot. Like, it gives you the Alliance or whatever it gives you, and that's cool, but it needs something. Maybe a kill spell Nature Spirit thing. Something in the deck. I like it a lot. I'm excited that I finally got it built. And I'll try to cook with it some. But it needs some help. But it's still a fun deck that you can build. Like all these decks here, you can build and have fun in the card game. Touching on a newer deck from EX08. Like I said, I try to get all the ones from EX08. And I do think that Pyramidimon is a good rogue tier deck. I'll put it right up here with the Dinomon. I think it can sneak in a topping here or there. It's definitely a very aggressive deck. This deck can swing in, get a lot of checks, and put your opponent in a really bad spot. I like this deck a lot. I like that it's the new, digi burst kind of mechanic, but not without saying that. I do think that Fragment's really cool. Also, being able to give you some kind of protection. I like the deck a lot. Do not be surprised if you see this deck get a random top in the upcoming tournament soon. Really cool, fun, strong deck. You should definitely build it. Excited that this deck came out in EX08. Let's touch on some Gallantmon, the big bad of the Digimon world. What was that? Digimon World 3 or 4? Either. I think it was 3. Yeah, with the Venmons. Really cool deck. I like this deck. I think it is a decent rogue tier deck. I don't know how I feel putting it over some of these fast decks. I just think that it's a deck. If you see your pieces, you get into your Gallantmon soon, and you're able to kind of press your opponent. I think it still needs some help, but not as much as those other decks at the bottom there. I think that it still does what it does, but, you have to have played against Gallantmon to understand like what it does and how powerful it can be. A lot of games, they never get there. You don't see it. So maybe, yeah, need help then. I'll put it down here in the need help tier. It still needs something. I think we're getting some more promos for it maybe and some more support. We did just get some new support for it, and I think it does help out a lot. But Gallantmon is a really cool, strong deck. Build up into this really cool Digimon, similar to like if you built a mother deck. Kind of the same shenanigans-ish that's going on, but without as much of a payoff for protection. But don't sleep on it. Gallantmon pops off, can win games for sure. Going to Digimon, another deck that got support. I think that this deck has so many different ways. This is Digimon, Deep Savers, Aqua, whatever you want to call these different decks. I'm lumping them all into one with the Digimon because I think it's the best version of the deck now. I want to say that this is, can top tournaments, but it takes a lot of play, right? I think that the Metal Seedramon Ace is going to be a card that gets played in a lot of random black decks and can be abused in those maybe a little bit more, but I do think that Digimon is super strong, and I do think that it is a really good rogue tier deck. I don't think that we'll see it topping, in every tournament, so I'm not putting it in that tier, but I do think it can sneak in some tops, and I do think it's a little more powerful than some of these decks with what it can do, really putting your opponent in a bad spot. I like this deck a lot. We need to see more people playing it, right? Like, we have so many decks in the Digimon trading card game, and I know a lot of people just want to play a lot of the best decks, but we have so many decks that some of these decks here, if you put the time and effort into them, you can top some tournaments too. I like Digimon, really strong. Gonna put it in the top of the... me saying that out loud. Yeah, I'm gonna put it at the top of the rogue tier. I think it's a little better than all these decks, only because I've seen how strong it can be. I think we're just waiting on people to play it, get their cards, build the deck, put some time into it, and maybe be able to sneak into a top 32, right? These are all decks that I think are on the cusp of being able to get into a top 32 in a tournament, whereas I think that all of these are definitely getting in there, and especially these at the top. I'm saving the best for last. We'll talk about him last. But let's talk about Wargreymon, a really strong deck. This is just Wargreymon X, however you want to build these decks. These decks are still really, really strong. I will put it like this. I do think that this packages of these decks are really strong. They're still older decks, right? They do older things. They're maybe not as powerful as other stuff, but all the consistency is there that if you see this deck, you know how to play it. You got it built the way that you want to. I think that Wargreymon X is a decent rogue deck that can maybe sneak into a tournament top here or there. It's just older, right? I think a lot of people aren't playing it, and I think that some of these walled up bodies having protection hurts this deck a little bit, just like with the Metal Garurumon, but can still really pop off, put your opponent in a bad spot sometimes. On the vein of like talking about red stuff, birds are going crazy. Birds are going burr. A lot of cool lists that we've seen coming out in Asia and in some of the recent tournaments. I think that the birds are very pilot oriented, so we've seen one or two here and there in the tournaments, but I think a lot of people don't know how to play against this deck at the moment. I think that I would be, not doing due justice by saying that it is a tournament topper deck. Just so you know that this isn't straight birds. I just put the Biome on here. This is, hybrids playing birds. All the different builds that people are doing with the birds, just like the bird package as a whole is kind of what I'm putting here, right? Like, not just building just straight birds, which you can do. It's actually really strong too, but the bird package as a whole is really strong, really cool and powerful how people are using it. But the main decks that are, building this really strong are, I'll just throw this up here too, Red Hybrid. they're just abusing red hybrid stuff, but a little more consistency and not as reliant on your tamers, because you still run like the Ancient Guru package. So really these decks kind of in tandem along the same spot, being able to do things, whereas like the Biyomon package stuff can delete, you know, things more with the Garurumon Ace and the Garudamon X Anybody. Really cool, strong decks. I think that both these decks, tournament toppers, until something happens to Red Hybrid, it's not going anywhere. I don't put it in the best deck of the format, but I do think it's really, really strong. Definitely stronger than these. I don't think they get over Mother the right way, so they're behind Mother in this sense, but Birds, Red Hybrids, Tier 1 toppers for sure. Since we're talking about that, where is the blue hybrids? Yeah, here we go. I just did it with the Magna. Blue hybrid's still really strong too. You know, a lot of people here just not messing with blue hybrid as much, and I think maybe just rogue tier deck then. Not as powerful as the red with being able to pop off, but still really, really strong. I like blue hybrid a lot. I think a lot of people just are choosing to forgo that for the purple and red hybrid at the moment. Those two decks are a little more powerful, but a strong, really strong rogue tier deck if you just want to build straight blue hybrids. So since we're talking about hybrids, let's go ahead and get the other one out of the way. Our Dustmon Velgramon Loop. One of the best decks in the format for sure. Deck is crazy. I do think that something needs to happen to this deck. I'm not sure what that is. Maybe it's the Jack Raids. Maybe it's putting the Velgramon to 1. Something needs to happen to this. It's very oppressive. And it's very kind of mindless looping play that you're doing. You're just doing the same play over and over again, right? Until your just opponent is out of resources and you're able to out-resource them. There's not a lot of thought into the deck about what you need to do. All your plays are the same. It's really just count your trash, count what you have, you know, trying to keep up with the colors on the field. But it just keeps doing the same thing over and over again. And it's not a lot of fun to play with or against. I was really high for purple hybrids because I love purple hybrids. They were my favorite. I remember playing them when they first came out. I made them pretty good. I remember topping a couple tournaments with it, online tournaments, and it just being a really strong deck. But now it's just not the same deck. It's just not fun, but it's still definitely super powerful. One of the best decks in the format, and the art is cool. Like, if you want to build a deck with some really cool art, the Dustmon alt art is absolutely insane. I have a Digimon Ace here. I'm not sure what I was doing with this one. I think that this was just part of like another like not Imperial Dramon deck. I can't remember what I was talking about with this one, but we'll just put, you know, down here at the outside looking in. I already touched on both the Imperial Dramon decks, so maybe just made a mistake putting this in here. But this could count for like something maybe I didn't put on here, which is just like Mega Zoo. Maybe that's what I was thinking about with this one. Mega Zoo. It's Mega Zoo. I think it's too slow. Don't think it does a lot. I do think that there could be some cool ways to build Mega Zoo and maybe, you know, sneak into a good deck. But I wouldn't recommend a lot of people who are wanting to play the Digimon trading card game to build Mega Zoo and, like, think about it. Like, just do Beostarmon then, right? Do something like that. But I still have my Mega Zoo built, and it's still a really cool, fun deck. But I don't think it's very competitive. I do think that you can, you know, get your gimmick off sometimes and really smash people over. But for the most part, not a very consistent, strong deck. Going into this Cinderellamon deck, this deck is really cool, very powerful, very consistent. I'm not sure why a lot of people aren't playing it. I think it has a lot of good ways to answer some of the top decks as well. But it hasn't done that yet, so without a lot of merit to it, I don't think I could put it into a consistent tournament topper deck. And with that being said, I guess I need to move down the Lord Nightmon too at the top of the tier with these decks, because it also hasn't done that. And it's going to take people working with these decks to get these tops in, where I feel like a lot of these decks here are definitely getting them. But it is really strong deck. You know, being able to use your tokens to apply pressure and get it the overclock. I think that some of the aces are really good. I think maybe it's, you know, I like the deck a lot. I think it's super powerful. You can swarm the board on your opponent. You can run some really good aces. Put Shine Greymon Burst Mode, or the whatever the level 7 yellow ace Shine Greymon is, the ace, the yellow one. It's so strong in this deck. Run it at a 1 or 2 of, excuse me, and I promise you that it will make your deck so much better. Really, really strong deck in the format. I think just missing out in maybe big tournaments throughout a big tournament, you know, trying to see your plays, because you need Digimon, you need your lineups to really, you know, pop off, and that hurts where a lot of these other decks here, you know, 4 or 5 of these decks just ignore being able to do normal Digimon stuff. Other than Gallantmon, really, all these other decks have kind of ways to cheat out Digimon, whereas this deck has to kind of go into the lineup, and not a lot of way to cheat out the Digimon, which are rookies, sure, but not a lot of ways to, like, really, you know, get into it fast, so you're kind of relying on finding your pieces, finding your, you know, search cards. Royal Knights, I think, are still really, really strong. A really good, strong rogue tier deck that you can play in the game and maybe sneak into some tops in the tournament. It is getting support, so I do recommend you try to grab your pieces to build this deck now. Digimon is a deck that got some support, but I still think that Digimon needs more help. I don't have a lot to say about it. I've had Digimon built forever, but it always feels very gimmicky, and with this new support, it still feels the same way, like really gimmicky, trying to find your stuff. It's going to take someone working really hard with Digimon to try to get it atop in the tournament. I don't think that it's out of the question, though, because it does have some big burst turns that it can do, but just still needs some help, even though it's already gotten a lot of support. Going to Fenrir-Lugamon. Seen a downcut in the amount it's played, but it is still one of the best decks in the format. Do not get it twisted. This deck is absolutely crazy, really strong. I think that, you know, maybe I'm in the minority with wanting the deck to get hit a little bit, but I think that the turn, like, if you can just see on turn 2, you see your 2 searchers able to move up with the Lugamon, go into full combo, it feels really bad for your opponent, and they're not able to do something about it, and then being able to go into the Takamikazuchi mode is just absolutely insane. This deck is feast or famine, though, I will say that, but the feast is feasting good. This deck pops off, does what it wants, but you do have to get there, but the power of it is undeniable. Still one of the best decks in the format. Let's go into some of the big boys, DNA guys. I like magnamon a lot. I will put it in the same vein as with the Aegrisamon, where, you know, you're getting to like this big DNA Digivolve, but you're missing some pieces to get there. But once you get there, it is super powerful and strong. These 3 decks here, Omnimon, Aegrisamon, magnamon, you know, kind of do similar things, right? We're trying to get into a big DNA Digivolve deck and, you know, doing those shenanigans. I love it. He's one of my favorite Digimon in the card game, and I think that it is a great tier 1.5 rogue deck for sure. Staying on the level 7 Digimon, Ragnarlormon, I do not think that is up there with those 3 in the sense of being able to consistently do those things, but it does have a great payoff, right? So I think that is still a really good, strong tier 1.5 rogue tier deck. Really cool with what it can do, but just maybe not as consistent as some of these other decks. So I'll put it near the bottom of it. Sakuyamon got some new support with Sakuyamon X Anybody, and I think it still needs help. In the sense that if you play this deck the way it is, it feels cool, it's fun, it's waifu deck. I do think that this all helps it out a lot, but it's still just missing like this good win condition in the deck, right, that it needs. I like the deck a lot. I really think it's cool, unique, interesting deck, and if you like this deck along with the Digimon, build the deck. You'll have fun. You may be able to get a couple wins here at your local every now and then. Maybe even struggle to win at a locals, but it is a still, you know, put together Digimon deck that just needs help. I might catch flack for that. I know a lot of people are cooking with her, but until we get, like, you know, the aces coming out for her later, if everybody's just going to abuse, you know, ruin mode with her, that's a totally different deck in general. I don't think you can call that, you know, her deck. That's a different deck. And the deck alone, with how it's supposed to be built together, needs some help. Going to the purple boy, Leviamon, I think, is a tier 1 deck. It's a tournament topper deck. It's really, really strong. It can do a lot of things, controlling your opponent's board, being able to get big swings in, still doing all the amazing things that it used to do, and it still does it. We've seen it top in a couple tournaments here and there. Really strong deck. I think that it's not as fast as, you know, the red package hybrid kind of bird stuff at the moment. I don't think that it can get around Mother as easily. I could be wrong about that, but she doesn't have a level, right? So you're not able to actually ever blow her up. So that makes it a little bit harder. And then I think maybe some of, you know, the hybrids being able to, you know, save themselves kind of give them a good matchup into it too. But I do think Leviamon is really strong, really scary. I love Leviamon. He's one of my favorite 7 great demon lords, Gluttony of Sin in the game. That's not his thing, right? He's Gluttony. I can't remember what his is. But he's really cool. I love him. Really strong deck, tier 1, tournament toppers. Since we're talking about armor decks, I do think that Magnamon is... I want to say one of the best decks in the format. I know this best deck in the format is getting pretty high, but I think we have so many powerful decks in the Digimon trading card game, and I think that's why we're due for a ban list, because some of these maybe need to come down some. I think a lot of people are just sleeping on magnamon, maybe tired of playing him per se, but he is one of the best decks in the format. The deck's still really, really strong. If you get into your protection early, you're able to push your opponent, and a lot of decks just don't have ways to beat this deck, right? Like, how viable you are in the game used to be, can you beat, you know, Rapidmon and Magnamon? Can you get through those decks? And a lot of these decks down here still don't have a lot of reliable ways to do that, and that's what keeps these two decks from being so strong in the meta. I do think that Magnamon is better than Rapidmon, a little more progressive way and easier to, you know, that protection effect. Rapidmon doesn't have that same thing. I wish it did, but one of the best decks in the format, for sure. Super strong. Let's go into another good deck, or new deck, Scottymon. I appreciate anyone who has hung around this long. I know this is a long video, but I really wanted to do this one just to give the community, you know, my thoughts on what, like, most of the, you know, viable, decent decks in Digimon are. So anyone that's been around this long, I appreciate it. Please leave a like and subscribe. It's a lot of fun. We still got some ways to go. We're getting on 45 minutes already. But Scottymon, I think, is a really good rogue deck. I think that it does some really cool stuff. It's really strong. But doesn't have a ton of ways to pressure the state of the game. I do think it can wall out some of these decks with being able to strip their sources and not making them do it. I think people are sleeping on Scottymon for sure. Really good deck, good rogue tier deck. I'm just not sure where to put it, right? Because it has really good matchups into a lot of decks up here, even in the top tiers, being able to strip the sources of these Digimon and really getting some cool things. But I think it just needs a little bit more. But I think it is a really strong rogue tier deck. I'll put it above the King Drizzle because I think it can be pretty fast if you run it with like that blue hybrid package, right? And with that sense, talking about it, I'm just going to put Hexablow along with it. Both these decks do similar things. I think Hexablow is just abused more in the blue good package deck, which is, you know, I put Mirage there for that sense, that he gets used in that, but really strong with being able to shut your opponent down. I think that the reason these two are, the Syndromon and the Lord Knightmon X, are maybe a little bit above it, because they're able to press the state of the game a little faster and aren't as, you know, defensive, to say that. Dex, Darugumon, Dex deck, it is really strong. People don't play it, though, which is the story you're getting to see along with a lot of these other things. I do think that it is still a really, really strong deck. It's a really good, you know, rogue tier 1.5 deck that could top some tournaments. I do think that it could be put over these two decks and the Syndromon and the Lord Knightmon. That would be meaning I'm thinking it's a tier 1.5 toppers, but it is a really strong deck. I think that it takes a good pilot. The deck is not as straightforward as you would think, but the power of the deck is definitely there. I think it has pretty decent matchup into any of these decks. Maybe the ones that strip the sources, but the deck is really strong, and it's getting more support. We're getting a new Death X-Mon, if you didn't hear, and you should be getting these cards in the middle of this deck now, because it's still a really strong, you know, rogue deck that maybe can sneak into some tournaments here and there, which I think it has, actually. Maybe just not as consistent as some of these other decks, but really strong, powerful. Build it now. You won't regret it. The King of Rogue, and forever keeping people's hopes up that they can top in a tournament with it. All Force. I still think this deck is really strong. I do think it's in the vein of, with some of the Wargreymon, Metal Garurumon, of that old tier of a deck, right? It does what it does, really, really strong, but it hasn't gotten anything new in a while, so it's not able to be as abusive as some of these newer decks are with, you know, the mechanics of being able to play a Digimon if you only have one or less, right? Like, these decks need to be updated with that kind of stuff, but that doesn't mean I don't think that Old Force maybe can't sneak in one here or there. It's a great rogue deck. Maybe a little pricey for people who are trying to get into the card game. But Old Force is a really good deck. Nice rogue tier 1.5 deck. Medieval Gallantmon. I put this here maybe thinking in the sense of like, this card alone is just so powerful. You can throw it in so many decks and instantly makes them better. I know that the hybrid, the bird package all run it. I know that Mother Control runs it. I'm not sure what I was thinking about putting it here on its own, but maybe just another version of Mother Control or any kind of like control deck that's not with Mother. But Medieval Gallantmon, special case, deserves to be in a tier of his own. If you're playing a deck and you're abusing Medieval Gallantmon, your deck is probably in a good situation to be a tournament topping deck. Like, this card is so strong. All the decks that really use this card really are eating well right now. And with that being said, I know that this is probably a hot take, but I think that this makes Savagamon where it wanted to be, right? I think Savagamon is really strong. I think it's a really cool deck. I think it does a lot of things now. I will move them down here to maybe the bottom tier of the tier 1 point toppers, but Savagamon, Vortex Warriors are cooking and eating now. So good, and they're going to keep doing it because we're getting the ace. I think the Medieval Gallantmon gave this deck exactly what it needed to be able to compete with some of these top decks now. Excuse me. Because you're able to, you know, say your Savagamon gets cleared off, you're building up in the back, and then this is a situation where, like, the Medieval is so strong. Now you have a body that can help get you to those turns, and this is with any deck, the turns that can kind of help you get to the next round where you move up your next rookie to start moving up and, you know, building into a stack. I think that Vortex Warriors are really strong right now, and you should build a deck with them. They have so much support, and I do think that we'll see these decks start topping tournaments now. So maybe this one's a little bit more of a forecast and not based off of recent history, but I do think that these decks are tier 1 tournament topper decks. Maybe see 1 or 2 every time in the top 32. That's my beliefs on it. Tyrant, I also think, is still really strong. I think that it's just not as fast as or consistent right now, so we haven't seen a ton of topping in it, but I think that it is the gatekeeper for Rogue tier, right? If you want to be one of the best decks, you gotta be able to get over Tyrant, and I think a lot of these the decks that are in, you know, best deck format or tier 1, they can do things to Tyrant, whereas a lot of the decks that are below Tyrant don't have as many ways to get around the Tyrant, and so Tyrant is the great gatekeeper of the Digimon trading card game for all these rogue tier decks. It does what it does. It walls your opponent out. Your opponent has a hard time getting over you, and I think it's the king of the rogue tier because it can sneak into a tournament, any tournament, and almost any format that you really want. It is awesome deck. Definitely build it if you want a cheaper deck to build and always be able to compete, because you always have a chance even to get some of these top tier decks, because they also have to find their ways to out your Tyrant, which some of them can do because they get to ridiculous numbers, situations like that. But Tyrant is super strong. Maybe should be in tier 1, but I think it is the quintessential rogue tier deck in the Digimon trading card game. Going into the Fortress Queen Beemon, this deck is really strong. I like this deck a lot. I think that a lot of people were maybe hyped on this deck and then just didn't play it. I think it definitely competes with the Dex deck, the Lord Nightmon, the Syndromon, the Ice people. This deck is really strong. Maybe not as fast as some of these other decks will be able to swarm or things like that, but really good control, strong rogue deck that could maybe see a top here or there in a tournament. Really fun deck. I like it a lot. So we're putting it in the rogue tier, 1.5. Going to the 7 Great Demon Lords, this is a tier 1 deck for sure. I do not think that it's one of the best decks of format. I will say that, even though it did really well, placed in these tournaments, got high toppings, but if you go based off the numbers of this deck, conversion rate wasn't that well of it. You know, you just brick with this deck sometimes, which is kind of hard to brick with, but I think that the power of the deck puts it in the tier 1 alone. It's going to sneak in some tops here or there. I do think that it just... I don't like playing the deck. I don't like playing against the deck. You're kind of just on a clock, which doesn't feel good in the game. They get to the Ogudamon. They win. I don't like mechanics like that. But if you get there, you win, right? So in that instance alone, that's so powerful that you have to put this deck in tier 1 or best deck in formats up there, wherever you want to put it. I'm just putting it in tier 1. Because I think it's a little inconsistent, not as consistently as topping as all these other decks will be, or are doing, or will be. But really strong deck, for sure. I don't like the deck, and it's really strong. Going to Marcus. Where are the Shy Greymon players at? It's still a really good rogue tier deck. I'll put it, you know, like where Old Force is at, right? Both these decks, kind of similar things. Need to see your Tamers. Need to see a good lineup of your Tamers on the board already to pop off. I do think that maybe, you know, Marcus is a little bit faster, being able to come up and be a Digimon himself and things like that, so faster than Old Force, but the same build-up style of needing to have your Tamers out to really do anything, which makes it a little bit slower than a lot of the other card decks in the Digimon trading card game at the moment. But still a really powerful deck, really cool, strong. Shroudmon. People cook with Shroudmon now. He's a good deck. I think it's a decent rogue tier deck. We'll put it in the middle, just above the Marcus, since we were talking about him last. It can pop off. It can do some really cool things. I think it has seen a lot of support. It's getting more support as well. So if you're looking for a deck that is going to get support and you want to build, it's a good rogue tier 1.5 deck. And it outs some of these, the top tier best decks and tier 1 decks in certain ways that maybe they're not used to. And it has some pretty decent matchups across the board. And some really bad ones, though. So something to look out for. And then my favorite deck, Blackwood Greymon X Anybody. If it was up to me, I would say best deck in format because it's my favorite deck. It's the deck I always play. I love it. People just don't play it. I love sneaking up with people with this deck. Let me rant about Blackwood Greymon. I love this deck. Really, really strong. If I had it my way, I'd say best deck in format, but I know better than that. It's not the best deck in format. It is still a really good, strong rogue tier format deck. I think that we need the Greymon X Anybody back. Please give me my Greymon X Anybody back. But still a really strong rogue tier deck for sure. If I'm being honest, you can take this to your locals, still win some locals with it, really put the beat down on them. And it just does what it does, right? I think it maybe needs a couple more pieces, but the deck hasn't gone anywhere. People just don't play it. It's had some hints. It's a little slower, but I think with how important hybrids are right now, trust me, build Blackwood Greymon, comment down below what you think about it. I'll put my list out there somewhere for people to go play with. He wrecks other decks. He still does what he does. I never stop playing Blackwood Greymon, and I just wanted everybody on the channel to know that. He is my favorite Digimon. I love Blackwood Greymon X. I still think it's a really strong rogue tier deck that you could probably sneak in, at a tournament, win your locals with it for sure. But this is the tier list breakdown. Like I said, that one was a doozy. Long video. We're pushing it here. Anyone that stuck around, I really, really appreciate it. I know most people probably just cut to the end and, clip this here with no context. But I think I did a pretty good job trying to bring in, all the decks I can think of. But just to restate, best decks in format, Gallantmon, Imperial Dramon, Purple Hybrid, Barrage Package stuff, Magnamon X Anybody, Fenrir Lugamon, and Angels. So 7 decks that I think are the best decks in format. I think that we are in a very healthy meta if you're playing one of these top decks, but I do think that some of these decks need to get a hit. But please let me know in the comments what you think about this video. If you liked it, please, put your tier list. Use this tier list maker to go through and make your own. I put a lot of work into it. I appreciate everyone hanging out with me. Peace.